I wanted to show everybody that one of the biggest things when rebuilding a 1911, in this case it's a Series 80, one of the biggest things that you have to contend with is the, I guess the fallacy that there are drop-in parts. There's actually no such thing. One of my friends over at Gator Gun said drop-in part just means that it's going to only take you an hour and a half to fit the part to fit your gun. So point well taken, and actually point experienced in this case. I basically changed out every moving part in this gun except for anything on the slide. I didn't touch the barrel. I am working with the bushing. I didn't have the patience to wait for my stainless steel bushing to come in. So what I did is I polished off all of the bluing off of this particular bushing for now, just to give me that same look. And once that other one comes in, I'll change it out. But other than that, this all stayed the same. I didn't change anything, nothing at all done. Now I will change the sights out at some point, but at this point I haven't done any of that. None of the spring, none of that was changed out. Yes, the plug, that's going to be changed out. This is the original plug, and this is the new one. Changing those out. But the frame is where I really focused on changing everything out. The old frame, these are the parts that the old frame had that I have changed out thus far, that I'm not going to put together and show you at this point, because it just takes too much time to do some of these things. Magazine catch, changed that out. Now, one of the things that I wanted to explain, I have a habit already, and I'm not an expert. I'm a big-time amateur, more of a gun fan. The things that I do on these guns is simply something that I like to do. I'm not necessarily good at it. I'm passing on information to any other amateurs out there that may run into the same issues that I have. I am a big proponent on polishing and sanding and filing to make these things fit properly. Even if it doesn't look like something needs to be sanded, I like to sand it. This is the magazine catch. This particular magazine catch that I put in, it required a pretty good little bit of sanding. I sanded all the edges. I used 320 grit sandpaper, and I also have 600 grit sandpaper, and I use a Scotch-Brite as well. Basically, I'll take a lot of the edges off, all in these little grooves here. I'll take off as well, simply because you look how tightly these catches fit. They fit extremely tight inside the frame right there. I mean, there's no play, no room or anything like that. So they're gonna grab, and they're gonna want to pull on that frame when you try to push them through. I sand everything. Again, I sand all of this end right here where it comes out of the left side of the frame, all of the right end, the right side right here where it comes to the right side of the frame, everything around here. I sand all of that. Sand all of that real lightly. I'm not trying to take a bunch of material off. I'm just trying to make this thing run smoothly through there. Okay, that's one of the things that I changed out. I'm showing you the things that I'm not taking out of this to show you again, like that. The trigger. The trigger, I did a lot of work on the trigger. Let me kind of give you a general idea of some of the things that we did by looking at the old trigger. Most of these triggers, when they come, they're fat. They're thick right here on the top and on the bottom of the trigger. So in many cases, you got to come in there and you got to take off. I didn't have to take much off, but I had to take a good bit off right here. I say a good bit, you know, more than just sanding it. I had to take some material off, and on the bottom. Again, I'm not a gunsmith. I'm just telling you what works for me. What I did to keep it flat, instead of trying to hand do it like that, I would just simply put this flat, and I used a block, armor's block, and I just run it back and forth. And you're not trying to bear down on it, you're just trying to take some material off. If you have to take enough of it off, in one case I had to take a little more off the bottom, you can use a standard file and just run that on the bottom. Again, keeping it flat like that so that that whole surface is taken off at the same time. One thing you'll also notice is a lot of these parts, and I'm sure the experts out there will explain why, sometimes they're not totally flat. A lot of times I've noticed in sanding these things that the edges of them, like around the very edges, it's a little bit higher than in the center. And many times what I'll do is I'll sand these surfaces until the whole surface has a little bit coming off of it. That way I know the entire surface is flat at that point. Because again, if you start to sand a little bit, you'll notice that the very edges will start to lighten up a little bit. Obviously showing you that the center area right here is not receiving any contact with the sandpaper. So I like to do that until it totally gets flat and shiny all over. Same with the top of it. Another thing that I like to do, and this is not something that, none of these tips are things that I've ingeniously figured out. Either somebody's told me or it just happened to work for me. I was told that in a lot of cases you have in some of these parts tiny edges that will grab and catch, especially when your magazine goes through here. Sometimes it'll scratch the insides of your magazine. I also took my 320 grit sandpaper and sanded all these edges around here and all the inside and even the outside. One thing, and this is what I kind of look at it like this, and from a simple format. If you sand or polish everything that comes in contact with other metal, it's got to be smoother. So that's one thing that I painstakingly did on every single part in this gun, is I polished everything that makes contact with something else at some point. In this case, I did the entire trigger bow, the whole thing. Okay, so once I got the trigger in there, trigger was good to go. You know, I had to work it a little bit. You can see where it's still pushing on the side right there as I slid it through. But that's not where it's not gonna be grabbing right there, simply because the trigger's only gonna go back about that far. So I mean, it's not gonna be going back very far. This was just something that scraped off as the trigger pushed through the frame itself. So I'm not gonna take it back out to sand it back down, because I want to keep that thickness of that trigger. I don't want to sand it down that much more narrow, because I don't want it wobbling and flopping back and forth. Again, that little mark right there was simply from driving or pushing the trigger through the frame itself. It won't be doing that on a regular basis. It's not like that's going to be a snag point or something like that. So I'm not taking it back out. As I told a lot of you that I've talked to online, this is a Colt model, and I want to put a beaver tail safety on it, grip safety. So you buy this little jig right here, and what this jig does is it shows you can get a Sharpie or just something sharp. It doesn't matter. Even sometimes you can use a punch, and you can grind it on the back here, and it will give you a line where you need to basically get your file, whichever size file you want to use. And it makes a mark to give you this nice curve right here that this grip safety is going to fit in. Since we're talking about grip safeties, this is the old grip safety. You can actually see where the frame, actually not the frame, where the frame of the gun, I'm sorry, scratched on the back of this, how far back it is. This is the new one. As you can see, they don't go near that far back. If you put them end to end right there, or let me change the other way where you can see the markings on it. If you put them end to end, you can see these markings right here where the old frame used to scratch, and you can see how far back this one goes. And you can see that I had to grind quite a bit off, maybe upwards to maybe 1/8 of an inch even in some parts. But this was what I was getting rid of, and this is what I was putting on. So I had to take a good little bit off the back right there. This is of course going to get re-blued, so it's not a problem. I will polish that better, make that look a little bit nicer, but this is just simply to get it fitted. Another thing that I did, again, this is just a little bit of habit. Figure metal parts are touching metal parts right all in this area right here. I took my really fine sandpaper, and on the inside of the frame where those two pieces are going to rub back and forth, and I lightly sanded right inside there. You can see where I took that finish off. Did it to both sides. Again, that's just part on part, where I'm looking at pieces that are going to be moving against one another or coming in contact with one another, and I simply sanded that down lightly, not taking a bunch of material off. I also did the same with this. This is going to come into contact right in this area, and this part's a little bit dirty for me putting it on and off. It'll be cleaner than this. All in this area, I took that off. I even came inside here and lightly sanded that, lightly sanded all this. You can see where I've sanded around the edge right there, around the hole where the pin's going to go through, all in this area. One thing that I did, this grip safety was not wanting to engage properly, and there wasn't much travel. It basically was right there. It wasn't giving me a whole lot of room here. It wasn't even allowing, heck, I couldn't even get my thumb safety to go up properly. They had some issues in here with the fitting. One of the things that I noticed here with this barely was going in other words, you had to kind of, you almost had to really push this thing in. This is a recommendation that any gunsmith, not me, but a gunsmith will tell you. Always keep your old parts and use them and see where they were maybe modified or maybe where they were ground down or filed before. I simply took this when I realized that this wasn't functioning properly, and I knew that I had all of this done properly on the back. As far as on the frame where I had all that taken out, I got this piece and looked at, if I can hold these right, I probably can't. If you can see this, and I don't know that you can, look at where this one is ground right here where it touches the trigger bow, and it slants down and it's got a little slight drop off right there at the end. This Wilson Combat did not have that. It stuck out quite a bit over here. In fact, I believe it went straight down. It didn't even have this little turn down right there. But this even protruded quite a bit. I basically sanded this down with a file, or filed it down, and then I sanded everything else down. I sanded the surface here, all around the edges of it, all the way down. Everything is real crisp and smooth. There's nothing right there to catch. After doing that, it worked perfect. So again, all I did was take the old one, look at it, and look how it went together, and it worked fine. So that's the benefit and the beauty of having working parts that you can still go back and look at. Some of the other things I also did, took the hammer, and you can see where I sanded. Again, edges of it were higher than some of the inside. I basically sanded all this down where metal's going to come into contact with metal. You have to be really careful to not jeopardize the contact points where it's the hammer's going to come into contact with the sear. All I did was take some sandpaper and I knocked those edges off. I'm not trying to sand it down. I knocked the edges off, and that is it. I got off of it. This right here as well, you can see where I sanded quite a bit around here. Again, not removing material, just simply making sure everything is good and flat and concise all the way across, and smooth, very, very smooth. All of this is extremely smooth. I even hit the bottom of it down here where this bottom was coming in contact with my new beaver tail. So anyway, change that out as well. One of the problems that I had was anyone that tells you, as much as I love these Wilson Combat thumb safeties, anyone that tells you that these are drop-in parts are out of their mind. This took a lot of work. You can see the scratch marks here from taking it on and off, on and off, on and off. This shaft was a little bit fat. I didn't want to take much off of it because I don't want it rattling around, but it got in a bind going in and out. Not with everything on it, but like this. So I knew that it was the frame that was just a tad tight, so I loosened that up. But this right here, where it comes in contact with your sear and everything else, this is probably, and I know, you know, the real gunsmiths out there, or the actual gunsmiths out there, will tell you this is probably one of the most important parts. I found that this is probably one of the most important parts in a gun. It's this section of the thumb safety right here. It comes into contact with so many things in just the right way, all in one place. It's like right here. This is like the center of the gun right here. I sanded all across the back of this. These things come oversized. It's not like Wilson Combat sent me garbage. They come oversized for you to work on. Again, I highly recommend taking the old one and just looking at it and trying to duplicate what you see on here. It works. It totally did it for me. I just took my time with small files. I've got a number of different size files that I use. This one probably more than anything. You can even see where I've worn on the tip of it right there so much, because this one is a good one to use when you're really trying to get in there and really like get something sharp. If you don't have the patience, which I have very little of, this is probably not something that you want to do. But just go to Home Depot, Lowe's, any place, Harbor Freight, and just get a series of files, because you're going to probably use all of them. But anyway, that worked real well on this. Of course, I didn't want to sand anything on the frame. to make this fit. So this was done properly, I think. One thing that I found out, I actually bought an entire trigger kit, which, by the way, a trigger kit doesn't come with a trigger, just so you know. That's an amateur. The amateur in me coming out, I didn't know that. I thought when I ordered a trigger kit, I got a trigger. I should have read, I guess, a little bit better and looked into that a little better. But you basically get your hammer, your sear, your, oh gosh, well, your sear spring certainly comes with it. Everything you need except for a trigger comes with a trigger kit. Now, I'm sure someone out there, a real expert or a real gunsmith, can tell me why, but this is the old sear spring, this is the new sear spring. I couldn't get this gun to work smoothly for anything. It felt like the slide was moving back in gravel. I mean, it just felt like I was just totally grinding something. I mean, I immediately stopped even trying to move it because it was so bad. And I went through the motions trying to figure out what the problem was. One of the things that I did notice, other than the sear spring, was that my mainspring and the mainspring housing, this is the new mainspring housing and this is the old one. Don't ask me why, it's got to be how they're made. This one is a little bit thicker on the bottom apparently, because my sear spring, or the mainspring, poked up just a little bit. So what I did is I snapped off, and I don't recommend anybody doing this unless you ask somebody, and I did ask somebody and they told me yes, it was okay. I got my old, or my mainspring that came with the new mainspring housing, and I clipped about half of it off, and that released that what had happened was the hammer, well, it was really, I was having a fight to get the hammer to come back. So that took care of that issue. However, the issue with it being such in a grind, I took the old sear spring, took the new one and put it aside, and that's the one that came with that kit again, that trigger kit. And I put this old sear spring in and it worked fine. So I totally abandoned that other one. I felt like it still worked. The trigger worked great. What I did do, again, going back to being a little bit, I guess, anal about some things as far as parts touching parts, I sanded this back here. It actually kind of worked because it had this finish on this sear spring, so I could see where I had or where I needed to sand. I lightly polished this back here with some sandpaper. I lightly polished all the edges of it, the tips. You can see where I kind of sanded a little bit on that right there. Kind of got these ends not rounded off, but I took the points. This right here, I took off this piece all around the edge of it. I took off the little edges of it. Again, you could run your finger on them and feel the edges. Totally smooth now. This thing is totally smooth. It's real slick. Again, I didn't take material off. I just simply knocked off the stuff that I didn't feel like needed to be there. Again, I'm sure there's technical terms for that. And I'm not through with this, but even this, going into the mag well, it grabs hold of your magazine when you put it in there. This part right here has got to be filed down, and that's the last thing that I have left to do. That won't allow it to go in there. Really nothing else. Sometimes I've had to file this part on the slide stop down right here to make it roll in there smoothly. This is not an issue on this gun. I did kind of clean this up a little bit again just to get it to roll smoothly through there. But that's pretty much it. As far as getting some of the edges off, these are things that an amateur like myself feels like I need all the help that I can get. I'm not a pro by any stretch, so everything that I can do to make a part fit better, I'm going to do the easy stuff first, which is sanding these parts down and polishing them, so to speak. That's the easy part. You're not doing any harm, you're not taking off any material, so it doesn't hurt anything. So it's simply something that I do because it may eliminate the frustration of me trying to troubleshoot a part later on, where it could be something as simple as polishing. So I don't even wait to see if it needs to be polished. I take all these brand new parts that I'm going to put in, polish them all. Just a suggestion. This is an amateur suggesting that. Any of you other amateurs out there that are doing that, this is coming from a guy who is learning the hard way. I'm not a pro, I'm not an expert, I don't pretend to be. This is something that I do as a hobby, and I'm just trying to pass on some information that I've found out along the way.
What is that?
It's a little souvenir I picked up from Magus.